Thank you so much for singing this morning. I just think back to a few months ago, I guess now, when I got elbowed in the throat and couldn't hardly sing. And think to myself how fortunate I am to still have my voice, man. It was very interesting to have been elbowed in the throat and then not be able to even speak for a few days. Before we launch in and open the script this morning and hopefully just talk about Jesus in our lives, I want to take a moment to clarify something. A couple weeks ago, I made an announcement when we were talking about Gene's Sabbath post-church, and I shared a little story about one of my theology professors who had gotten us all together as a group, and he had asked us, while we were out on an evangelistic series in Africa, he had asked us, or not asked us, but kind of challenged us, like, how dare we be so concentrated on things that have nothing to do with the winning of souls? And it pricked our hearts at that time. And then, for lack of a better word, that was kind of an impromptu speech, unfortunately. And so I hadn't had time to prepare everything I wanted to say. And I related that moment to a little bit of guilt, like, yeah, how dare I be so invested in a lot of things that really don't matter that much. And so I shared that kind of in a promotion of Gene's Sabbath, and expressed to you that, I wanted you to feel a little guilt, but not really guilt. The truth of the matter is, what I wanted you to feel was inspired to take a few moments and put some priority on things that really matter, and one of those things we were hoping as a church would be Gene's Sabbath. And so I just wanted to clarify that nothing I ever say up here, I don't think anything Chris ever says, any of our guest speakers, have to do with guilt. That's an emotion, especially when it bogs you down. That's an emotion of the devil. An emotion that we believe that God gives is inspiration, that you've been inspired to change. Maybe there is reason for guilt, but that it inspires you to change. And so I wanted to clarify that. Maybe none of you even thought twice about it, but for the past 2 weeks I've been beating myself up. So like to just say a quick word of prayer together this morning, and once again invite the Spirit to be here with us. Heavenly Father, oh man, as we open the Word, we only hope that our lives are better today because of our interaction with you. And so I pray that our hearts would be open, our minds would be open, that we would be able to just really discern what message that you have for us about who Christ is in our lives. If you'd be willing to just pour an extra portion of your Spirit out this morning, Lord. Those who are in this room who maybe have heard this stuff, Lord, but it's really never sunk in, just ask that your presence would be here in a way that it would be undeniably felt. In your name, amen. I'd like to just jump right into the text here. Setting the stage a little bit, let's open our Bibles to Matthew 16. Some of you brought one with you. That's good. I like it. Some of you can find one sitting next to you. Matthew 16, though, we're going to set the stage just a little bit for what we're going to talk about. 16 verse 1, it says here that the Pharisees and the Sadducees came to Jesus to test him by asking him to show them a miracle. How many of you guys have ever prayed that prayer? Oh, Lord, just please show yourself to me. If you're even real, show yourself to me. And so, as they came to test him, Jesus realized where their hearts were at. He realized, they weren't sure about who he was. And so then he goes on to have a little conversation with his fellows where he says they hadn't brought any bread with them, and they think he's making a comment about bread when he says to them, hey, be careful of the yeast of these people. In other words, the yeast goes, it activates all of the bread, right? It's what makes the bread active. And he says, be careful that their teaching isn't what makes you active. And so they were confused a little bit, like, what does he mean? What does he mean? Is he mad at us because we forgot bread? Oh, we're so guilty. And so then he clarified, no, I'm talking about these people. So then they got it. The Bible explains all this funny little emotion. It's interesting. So then Jesus decides, here's a group of people who have come to me to to test me, to figure out who I am. And so he asks a question. Here we are in verse 13, and I want us to take a look at this. It says, when Jesus came to the region of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, who do people say the Son of Man is? And they replied, some say John the Baptist, others say Elijah, and still others Jeremiah or one of the prophets. So the people somehow knew about Jesus. They knew sort of who Jesus was, and in fact, some of them were intrigued enough, or at least doubtful enough, that they wanted to come and figure out an answer or two. Even people with poor meaning behind what they were doing were inserting themselves into the path of Jesus to figure out who he was. The Pharisees and the Sadducees. Show us we want to test him, see if he's really who he says he is. Please show us a sign. So he asked his friends, these people that he's with, this question, who do people say that I am? And they've heard who people are saying that he is. Well, we think he might be Jeremiah. We think he might be one of the prophets. Somebody has come back to visit us. Even though they weren't sure who Jesus was, they recognized something in Jesus. There was something there that they recognized. And I guess I would say that there's good reason for that. If we take a look at Hebrews 2, if you guys want to flip over with me for a second to Hebrews 2. It's right here at the end of the whole thing. We're going to take a look. Let's start here with. We're going to start here and then just kind of unpack a little bit before it. But right here in verse 17 it says, for this reason. So we know that there's some things that have been said, and now we get the reason. For this reason, he had to be made like brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered and was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted. There's a little verse that we see before this. Let's go into verse 2, a little earlier in verse 2 here, in chapter 2. In verse 5 it says, it is not to angels that he subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. But where is the place where someone has testified? What is man that you are mindful of him? This is a verse that many of us have probably heard before. What is man that you are mindful of him? I heard somebody talking about this recently. He said, why, if we believe in God, if we believe that there's this whole big universe out there, all of these things going on, what is man? What am I that God even thinks twice about me? Why does God even think twice about me? I'm just one person. In everything that's going on, why does God think twice about me? What is man that you are mindful of him? The Son of Man, that you care for him. You made him a little lower than the angels. You crowned him with glory and honor and put everything under his feet. Made a little lower than the angels, this guy was. A little lower than the angels. Why back here at the end of chapter 2, why does it say this? Verse 17, for this reason, he had to be made like his brothers in every way. He had to be made like his brothers in every way. Since the children, verse 14, have flesh and blood, He too shared their humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, and that is the devil. Verse 15. And free those who all their lives were held in slavery by the fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants, the people of earth. Who do men say I am? Jesus asked his friends. And his friends said all kinds of stuff. His friends say, the people say Jeremiah. The people say John the Baptist. The people say other names, but none of them are saying that you, Jesus, are who you say you are. Why was he made this way? Hebrews is identifying the nature of Jesus right here. The very nature of who Jesus is. He could have been made like the angels, but if he was made like the angels, would he have been like a brother to us? Anyone? I think in a certain way we don't relate to the angels. I relate to you and you relate to me. If my heart is broken, you get it because we've all hurt together, right? We may not feel the exact same way, but we all know how it feels. If we lose $100, we know how it feels to no longer have the money. If we experience a wedding, a great wedding service, and feel joy for this occasion, we all know how that feels. It's the brotherhood that we find with one another that makes us relatable to one another. Julie and I were watching last night some kind of little nature video she found. You know, I came into the room, she's all teary-eyed, and I'm like, what's wrong? And she's like, you got to come see these cute little animals. I'm like, whew, whew. Haven't done anything today. Good. So I go and we take a look at these animals. It's this whole series of these remarkable stories of where animals of different species are hanging out together. Lions and coyotes are friends, and they're playing. These full-grown animals have somehow forsaken their instincts, their natural behavior, and they've bonded with these other, this owl and this cat. This was a neat one. This owl and this cat. I mean, owls are predators. Cats are predators too, but owls, I mean, they'll latch up a cat and it's gone. And here this owl is in the tree, sees the cat, he flies down, they play with one another, they're batting at one another. I mean, these crazy things, this little deer that was abandoned by its mother, or who knows, maybe hunters, this little baby deer was out in the weeds, it comes wandering up. And this big, huge Great Dane or something like that, this big, huge dog, sees it, and it's like they immediately have this connection. The family stayed completely away from it because they believe that, you don't want to turn a little baby deer into a pet. But this dog and this animal for years now, I mean, this animal has gone out and had little fawns of its own, but from time to time returns with the fawns and plays with the dog. And then it goes back out, and they've even followed it. And it has like a herd of deer that it's out there with. But from time to time returns to hang out with this dog that it made this special bond with. And so even these animals, who by nature are different beings with different focuses, and some of them are predator and some of them are prey, have transcended and found common union. Why did Christ find it so necessary to find common union with us? And we can talk about heavenly things and godly things, and we're all smart enough, we can get them. So why was it so important for him to find that type of union with us? Talking about the nature of Jesus, the nature of Christ. He doesn't share the nature of heavenly things anymore. He shares the nature of humanity. He chose that. And why does it say? I want to focus here in this one little part. Here at the end it says, verse 18, because he himself suffered when he was tempted, and he is able to help those who are being tempted. I truly believe that the reason that Jesus took on the nature of humanity is so he could be relevant to us. Absolutely 100% relevant to us. And the reason, the whole inspiration for this topic today is I realized something in myself just recently. Julie and I, we weren't here last weekend. We spent a weekend away for our anniversary. Hallelujah. 2 awesome years, okay? Just phenomenal, okay? I'm praying and hoping her perspective is the same as mine. But I've been loving life over the past couple years, so that's been great. But we take some time away for our anniversary. We get to this little cottage, and they've got this book there of questions. And there's all kinds of questions. There's just one question. I want you guys to think about this one. Before I get to the question we're going to talk about, I want you to think about this one. I hope it doesn't, write it down, think about it later. I don't want you to be too distracted. But one of them was, if you could have a full paid vacation to anywhere in the world, money is not an object, location is not an object, you could do anything in the world for this 1 week, a full paid vacation, would you be willing to pull the wings off of a live, beautiful butterfly? I've got some automatic heads. No, I would not do that. Okay, how about stamp on a cockroach? Automatic. Way more people were okay with that. The others are like, oh boy, butterfly, death to a butterfly. I don't know what to say here. That's a good sounding vacation. Just interesting questions. One of the questions that came up, though, was who do you admire and why? Who do you admire and why? And so I had kind of this laundry list of people that I admired, just not this one person. I think of Betty Martin, who was one of my high school teachers. Just phenomenally educated woman. She could teach yes, you know her. She could teach tons, right? Good. And smart as she could be. She can teach 4 subjects to college level and all kinds of, she's got tons and tons of education. Yes, Dr. Betty Martin, correct. But I know her as Mrs. Martin. I'm sorry, I can't help myself. And so there's my father. Just some of the things about my father that, man, I just think are so awesome. I look up to him, and even my father-in-law. How about my grandfather? What a nice man. I just think of all these people. Who do you look up to and why? I began to think of those things, and we moved on to some other things, but I was just thinking of who it was that I looked up to, and something pricked me in my heart, and my thoughts started to come to me, and I said to myself, why wasn't Jesus on my list? I didn't specifically exclude Jesus from my list. It wasn't like I was like, Jesus, no. Pampal, though, good guy. No, I didn't exclude Jesus. But he wasn't somebody that came to mind for my list. And I don't know how it would have happened to you. I've probably already ruined it. I should have asked you first who you admire, and then I should have asked you, did Jesus come to any of your minds? I don't know. But it did not come to my mind initially. And I began to ask myself why. Why, when asked who I look up to, did it not come to mind? And I think it's related to this question that Jesus asked his disciples about who do people say that I am? See, the people that they were talking about were people that weren't the disciples. It was another group of people that may have been interested, may have thought things, may have been slightly intrigued, may have been doubtful, may have even hated Jesus. But the people they were referring to didn't have the real answer as to who Jesus was. All of their guesses were everything that Jesus wasn't. And so why was Jesus not on my list? I wonder sometimes if I don't sometimes personally think that I can relate to Jesus. Sometimes I've wondered if I have truly missed the nature of who Jesus really is. I get him. I like him. It's cool. Conceptually, it's neat. But have I missed the real nature of Jesus? Because why does it say he took on this nature? Not just for any random purpose. He became like brothers to us. For what reason? Because he himself suffered and was tempted And he is able to help those being tempted. I believe that Jesus became just like us so that he could infuse himself into our lives and be relevant to us. And some think, well, I'm going through things Jesus never had to go through. I don't know. Did Jesus ever feel lonely? Absolutely. Can we relate to Jesus as he felt lonely? Did Jesus ever feel betrayed? Absolutely. Can we relate to Jesus when we feel betrayed? Did Jesus ever feel happy? Absolutely. Can we relate to Jesus when we feel happy? Did Jesus ever feel abused? Can we relate to Jesus when we feel that way? Did Jesus ever feel love or satisfaction? Did Jesus have a relationship with his mother and his father and with his siblings, sometimes that, according to the scripture, wasn't an easy relationship? I mean, I look through the script and I find no lack of areas in which I can relate to Jesus. And yet somehow when the question comes to mind, who do you look up to? He's not on my list. Somehow I missed him on the list. Even though I can stand here and we can all logically go through the relationship that we could have with Jesus and the relatability that we have with Jesus. We can stand here and we can talk about that. But then what happens when we go out and we leave to another place? Do we forget then that this concept of the nature of Jesus? And we go out and we live reality and we forget that the concept, and now we think it can't be applied to our real lives. There's one thing that I really love about being a dean, and you've probably heard me say this before. I love being a dean because I get to live with the guys in the dorm. And very quickly, they will tell you by their behavior, by their interaction with you, if you are who you say you are. You live with them. It is very difficult to hide your problems when you live with these people. And teenagers, they're good barometers of who somebody is. If you're disingenuous, they get it. If you're weak, they get it. If you're overly harsh, they get it. They get it almost immediately. All of the things. And so it's so key that you be who you say you are when you're living with these guys. And I'll be honest, sometimes the picture is not pretty. Sometimes on a bad day, my temper can flare quickly with them. It doesn't always happen. It doesn't happen often, but it does happen. And they recognize it quickly. But if I did that all the time, suddenly I would be dismissed for somebody who can't control their emotions. So here I'm working with these teenagers. And because of that natural environment, I have to brush up on who I am sometimes very frequently. And I can't let my own person get away from me too much. And one of the things I like about working with these guys, especially when I have a work crew in the dorm, is that we get to build stuff and fix things. And so I brought a few things for building and fixing today. I'm going to set them up as we talk about another portion here. Got to cut a couple sawhorses here. I apologize, Andy, for walking everywhere. Andy's over there frowning at me right now because he's on the video camera. I made it way out of screen. So, before we get into this portion, I like working with these guys because I get to be in there with them, doing stuff with them. One time last year, I had this little Korean guy. His name is Han. And I may have shared this story with you before, I don't know. And we couldn't figure out why there was such a bad smell coming from the basement of the dorm. We had changed all the trash, we'd washed some things, we'd cleaned the bathrooms, but there was this one closet with a toilet in it that nobody ever uses. It's really just like a broom closet, but it somehow has this toilet in it. And so we finally opened that door, and that's where the smell was coming from. In the toilet, all the water had evaporated out of the toilet. And so I said, well, Han, there's the problem right there. And he's like, well, there's nothing in there. And I said, I know, that's the problem. He's like, well, how can that be the problem? So we went up and we learned how plumbing works. And that this people designed it so that the P-trap comes down. I don't know why it's called a P-trap, but it's not specifically related to P. But anyways, other drains have it, is my point. So it's called a P-trap. It comes down, and when water goes down the drain, it's higher up here, so it pushes the water down the drain. And then in a toilet, a certain amount of water is left behind. We've all seen that, and that creates a seal so that the smell from the sewage can't come back up at us. So when I explain this to Han, who is not interested, believe me, in my Sawzall, when I explained that to Han, his eyes lit up and he goes, oh, that's genius. I mean, he was very inspired by this. And so it's cool to be working in this environment where I get to hang out with these kids. Now, we're going to pause there for a second. We're going to come back to Matthew 16. Because Jesus asks another question, a follow-up question, now to his disciples. Not who do people say that I am? I don't care, but that opinion, okay, that's whatever. Now he's going to get down to this question, not just with in general, with anybody he could relate with, but the people who he has related with the most in his time here. So in verse 15, Jesus says, but what about you, he asked. Who do you say I am? And Simon Peter answered, you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, what's the difference there? What's the difference in those two questions? You are the Christ, the Son of the living God. What's the difference in those two answers? We've got one group of people that are saying anything but who Jesus actually is, and then we have this little nucleus, this group of people headed up by Peter, who's speaking for the group, as he usually does. Then their answer says, you are the Christ, the Son of God. Now, is that the real answer? That is the real answer, and they understood the real answer. Why did they understand the real answer? Number one, we know that the disciples had a lot of time with Jesus. They got to camp next to him and sit around the fire in the evening. They fished with him. See, unfortunately for us, in some ways, we don't have the advantage the disciples did. Because Jesus could look at Peter right in the eyes and say, Peter, why did you just say that? He became this man so that he could come down and infuse himself into our lives, become relevant into our lives. You're the Christ, though, they said. And the reason they knew that is because they were spending time with Jesus. These other people were not. In fact, they had their doubts even about who Jesus was. And there's this Switchfoot song. This could be a whole other sermon topic, but this one Switchfoot song has this line in it. It says, doubt your doubts and believe your beliefs. It's an interesting concept. Because sometimes I found myself hung up on my doubts rather than really hanging on to what I know I actually believe. I find myself hung up on my doubts. And that's where some of these people were. They were hung up on their doubting of who Jesus was. They weren't able to take in the great things he had said and done. They weren't able to take in the reaction. They weren't able to take in the fact that he was now part of the brotherhood, the nature of Jesus, to be relatable. Who do you say that I am, guys? Guys who are my friends, guys who I go camping with, guys who I walk with, guys who I preach with and eat with and talk with, guys who I have really become relevant to. Who do you say I am? Well, that's easy, Jesus. You're the Christ. You're the Son of the living God. And we get it. We get to see you every day. We get to hang out with you every day. One cool thing that I like about having the guys in the dorm with me, especially when I have to work and do stuff in the dorm. Recently I've been working on a project and I had to vent out of the roof on the dormitory with some PVC piping. So I brought my PVC piping here, and my buddy Seon was helping me with this. And the PVC piping is strong enough, but it was a little wavering there, you know. And so we started to learn about the Sawzall. Seon doesn't know anything about tools, but he's like my maintenance worker in the dormitory. And so we had to start to learn. I mean, we got to learn a little bit of everything as we go along, and that's cool. I'm fine. Everybody has to learn at some point. Not everybody was born on the farm, you know. So Seon is there. I mean, the other day he told me, he's like, "Thanks, Dean." He's like, "I've never mowed a lawn before." I'm like, "What?" Okay, I get it. You've never used a saw. You've never mowed a lawn before? Cool, all right. So we taught him to mow a lawn. It was rough. It was big class day, that one was. So we started to learn about a Sawzall. What happens with the Sawzall? See that? That's power right there. So the Sawzall has these teeth on it. It pulls back and forth. And so we were able to take a look at, you know, how the Sawzall really works. And I said, okay, well, let's try to hold this thing up here, and let's just try to cut the end off of the PVC right there. Ready? There we go. I got it. Hold on. Smooth as silk. Right there. Now, if my buddy Joe was here right now, he would say that was not a very effective cutting of the PVC. And in fact, I almost burst a blood vessel in my head, I think, just trying to hold that still. So I said, so Seon, there's a cool thing about a Sawzall. It has this plate right here. And the neat thing about the Sawzall is that no matter how much this is shaking around and going everywhere, this right here, this plate, this bumper, so to speak, this creates stability with whatever it is you're working with. So that no matter what's happening here, you don't have to work so hard to hold this. You can put it up against there, and you can begin to cut. See, and then it just comes right off. He's like, "Oh yeah, that makes a lot more sense." I said, "Because buddy, you're not strong enough to work against this Sawzall." I had him holding a piece of PVC, and he's shaking all around. So I said, "You're just not strong enough." And I said, and then what happens if we go and get some sawhorses? And then the piece that we're working with, we no longer even have to hold that. We've got it sitting on the sawhorses, and then we put this against the bumper right there. And so now everything is just, I mean, literally like butter. These things become stability for no matter how badly this thing is shaking around. These things become stability, and the tighter we are against them, the better it works. The neat thing about working with guys is, especially we've started this new work program at the school where we're teaching vocational education. We're supposed to view the workplace as the classroom. And so we learn things like work ethic. We learn things like, what does productivity mean? But in this particular case, we just learned the basic functions of how these things work and the stability. And I believe the Lord spoke to my heart. He said, share this with the guys that you're working with. It doesn't matter how much life bounces around. It is crucial that you find stability. Whether it's in your relationships, whether it's in your finances, whether it's in your church, whether it's in your spirituality. Because life bounces us around everywhere. It comes to us at 100 miles an hour sometimes, and sometimes multiple things are coming at us, and we are everywhere, and we're just doing our best to try to hold it all still. The thing about these disciples is that they spent time with Jesus in a relevant way in their lives. And when questions that other people didn't know, like who is Jesus, came to them, they knew the answer because Jesus was relevant to them. They had found stability in him. They had found stability as they wondered what life was about. They had found stability when they were looking for direction and who they needed to be. Jesus was infused into every aspect of their life. They ate with him. They prayed with him. They laughed with him. They swam with him. They hung out with him. They went to weddings with him. He was a part of every single thing that they did. And sometimes I feel that because Jesus is God, we forget that we can relate to him. We forget that there are spiritual things and lessons to be learned all around us. There are spiritual lessons to be learned from the cutting of PVC. It's not an innately spiritual thing. I'd cut PVC for the rest of my life, and I'll probably go to heaven, even if I never relate it to God. But there are spiritual things all around us that Jesus has said, I want to relate to you. How do you see me? Jesus asked this question. If Jesus were standing here today, what will we say to him? How do you relate to me? Who am I to you? Wayne? Who am I to you, Paul? Ralph, who am I to you? What if Jesus was saying that to us today? Would he be on our list of people we look up to when we had to put it down? Do we feel like we relate enough to Jesus? Do we feel like he's a part of even the little things in our lives? Or do we have so many things compartmentalized that he's not really a portion of our lives on a regular basis? Do we see him as a part of our ministry, as a part of our family? Do we see him as a part of our decision making? Do we see him as a part of our work? And so the question is simple. Is Jesus infused in our lives? Do we see him in everything that we do, and can we relate to him in everything that we are going through? Conceptually, we already went through the list, right? We believe that we can. But now my question for you is, are we living like we can? And so before we sing our last song together, I leave you with this question. Who do you say Jesus is in your life?